So today, our topic is why bossing doesn't work. And we're also going to talk about that in the context of advice giving as well. That's applies as well. So we're talking about this in the context of, in especially periods of change, and how we can utilize coaching techniques to support sustainable change in our lives and our teams. So I think all of us are very aware of the fact that we live in a fast changing environment, right? Where the demands on managers in particular, but also individuals and teams can really feel at times overwhelming. And I think managers play one of the trickiest roles, especially during change. They're squashed between the pressures from above to perform and the expectations from below to lead well during uncertainty. Now, often they are the last ones to know when change is coming around, yet they're quickly being made accountable for making change work, whether it's making redundancies, getting their team to adapt to a new system, or sensitively navigating the emotions of their team. And this is something that I've been really hearing from our community, trying to motivate and look after their team. And doing this all while maintaining business as usual, keeping up performance, with very little support and training in doing so, okay? Now, all of my research around how we as humans experience change, what that means in the work context, how we can efficiently drive change without driving our workforces into burnout. My research identified that managers are the key when it comes to successfully implementing change with employees who might feel overwhelmed, okay? The research shows that managers play a crucial role as to whether or not employees experience burnout or not. So it's purely down, or a big part of it is down to how somebody is managed, will depend on how they respond to change and if they fall into burnout or not. But they're also more likely to be the ones to experience burnout themselves. So the role of the managers during change is so crucial and so important in not only leading yourself through change effectively, getting the support that you need, but also in ensuring that your teams, your colleagues, your families, in the case of a global pandemic that, we're experiencing these heightened levels of change. So it could be families, friends. So struggling with change and those feelings of grief and fear that comes with it, that's all completely normal. And with change and uncertainty only set to increase, upskilling to ensure that we have the tolerance for uncertainty ourselves is so crucial, but that we're also supporting our teams through their anxieties and their feelings of loss. And often what it is with change is this feeling of loss of control. And we're going to talk about loss of control in the context of bossing and why that's such a problem, especially during change. Now, all of the research around great managers, what we know is that bossing, telling people what to do, it doesn't really work very well. For one, people don't retain information when they're just told what to do. But we also need to consider what the role of the manager is. And we have to kind of sort of just track back a moment to look at what the role of the manager has been and what foundations we're learning these practices from. Because for decades, many businesses adhered to, really rigid leadership styles where it was highly hierarchical, where managers gave orders, and they were really kind of enforced inflexible policies. And they often didn't welcome input from employees. Now, don't get me wrong, that absolutely still exists. But this type of command and control leadership of I'm the manager and you do what I say, it really took hold in the 1950s and 60s. And it was thought to have started by people who returned from the World War II and stepped into leadership positions. Now, whilst it may have been appropriate for the industrial era of factory working, for manual labor, in today's knowledge working world, so by knowledge working, I'm talking about the fact that we don't do manual work, we work with information. It doesn't work very well. This type of management style is less regarded but it still does exist. And why is it still so prolific, right? Why does it still exist? So historically, managers have, their role has just been to kind of manage systems and processes, and it was all down to just delivering a desired output, right? A desired number of output. And a lot of our management and business practices that we see today are built on the foundations of this type of work. But how appropriate is it now? And how many of them are we questioning? So this is a really, really simple example. I'm going to fly through this. But, you know, an example is the 9 to 5. Now, the 9 to 5 was brought about, and the 9 to 5 paradigm, it was brought about, it was introduced by Ford Motor Company, right, back in the 1920s. And it was a way of curbing the exploitation of factory workers. So they brought in the 2-day weekend, and they kind of limited the amount of manual work that they could do in a day. So they limited that to an 8-hour day. So with that in mind, when you think about the 9 to 5, and especially a lot of the work that many of us do in terms of knowledge working, it just doesn't fit the bill anymore. It's just not appropriate. So now the role, in the same way that that paradigm, that business practice is still prevalent today, and they're still holding on to it. Now, you know, the role of the manager is different. And now we're expected, especially during periods of change and uncertainty, we're expected to translate a leader's vision into change activity. So make that vision happen on the ground. So drive change and drive, you know, encourage people to go from one state to another. So this doesn't, you know, this not only means managing skills and behaviors now, but increasingly the complexities of human emotions, because we all know periods of change and uncertainty are really difficult for us humans, and we have to navigate that that difficulty, understand the human behavior behind that, the psychology behind that. So we suddenly need to manage, we need to facilitate, we need to project manage, we need to work cross-functionally, all while balancing business as usual activities whilst delivering the change, and coach our staff through uncertainty, right? And on top of battling our own personal challenges to boot, okay? So you can see, you know, it's no wonder that managers reach for kind of fast and furious methods just to get things done. Deadlines loom, and you can absolutely see why we fall into this trap. So the big problems, I think, are that it's dangerous to think that as managers or leaders that we have all the answers, okay, especially when it comes down to somebody else's career choices or how they go about their work. Now, many traditional models of managing people will often fall into the trap of simply imposing certain ways of doing things because it's worked well for you, and projecting our own notions onto others, right? But what that does over the long term, and if you've been a manager or a leader for a long period of time, you will have experienced this, and if you haven't, this is a good warning for you, but it simply creates dependencies, right? People dependent on you to make all of the decisions, and clones, right? So we just regurgitating the same outputs as people are trained to be clones of their managers and how they do it. So really, businesses will only in that way yield the same results time and time again. So it really, really puts a stopper on innovation. Now, I coach managers, and I often coach control freaks, and that's because I am one. And we are the worst at this, because on some deluded level, and I'll only speak for myself here, I always think that I'm not the manager that does this. But having been coached through this myself, and having coached other managers, and the difference between what the manager will say and when I talk to their employees, there's a huge disparity. So having a level of self-awareness in this is really, really important. Now, it can be packaged in lovely, neat little bows by many managers. You know, it could be, you know, I delegate tasks, you know, I ask them to do things, I don't tell them to do it. All of this is still kind of projecting that you know what needs to be done and how it should be done. Okay, it's still operating under the I'm going to tell you what to do, and you do it because I'm the manager and I know better, or it's going to be quicker. Okay, that was my default. Yeah, when it's busy and it's going to be quicker, that's definitely my default. So this quote that I absolutely love, I'm just going to get my clicker here. Hold on. Really sums it up for me. This one kicked me in the ass, right? Because I love giving advice, but it tends to be only pleasurable for the giver. I think, I don't know about you, but anytime somebody gives me advice, especially when it's unsolicited, I just think about all the ways that it won't work. And this happens with my husband all the time. So if he's going through like a big period of change, or, you know, he wants to crack a habit, and I'm like, I mean, I do this for a living, right? And I have to hold my tongue, because in the past, you know, I would give advice, and then he would, you know, sometimes he'd get quite defensive, or he would think about all the ways in which that won't work. Okay. And I'm sitting there like, I mean, I'm giving you gold here. and and I would be the same. I would be exactly the same. In my mind, I'm like, no, there's like 100 reasons why that won't work. And sometimes what it can be about is that when we're giving somebody advice, or we're telling them how they should be doing things, we're unintentionally implying that we know better, and that they're either emotionally or intellectually incapable of making that decision. And I know that doesn't sound like the case on a rational level, but on a really irrational level, you know, the bit of me that gets really, really defensive, that's where I'm coming from, definitely. So we've got to be careful with advice. Feeling incapable is the worst, right? Especially from your manager making you feel incompetent. That's double worse. Your romantic partner making you feel incompetent, that, yeah, you just don't want to go there. So it can create as well this kind of learned helplessness. And as I said before, this kind of dependency on managers and leaders, I think, is really, really dangerous in the corporate world. This sort of, you know, this compliance, rather than encouraging people to think critically about things and challenge things. It's just comply, do what you're told. So here's what I'm proposing. In many instances, I realize it may not be in all instances, but a coaching approach can avoid you falling into these traps. Now, the fundamental principles of coaching mean that your role is less about imposing your opinion and more about guiding that person to greater clarity and understanding by asking insightful questions. So it's kind of helping them to work through a problem simply by asking them questions. And in this way, it gives them a choice, and it gives them back that feeling of control. Remember, I mentioned the issue with control, especially during periods of change and uncertainty. I'm just going to let Pooja back in. Especially during periods of change and uncertainty, where we feel that we're out of control, often by telling people what to do, taking that kind of control away from them, can be really, really distressing. It can be really, really hard for us. Okay, so a coaching approach allows you to build teams who are capable of thinking through challenges rather than always having to refer to you. Now, that's often, whether managers admit this or not, there can be like this level of power, you know, this all-knowing position that managers hold. You know, they hold information, they hold power, and it might give them a power trip initially, and it might seem like a good idea in terms of making themselves really useful and invaluable. But actually, the reality is it's a fast route to burnout, as they climb the ladder and realize that all they've created is a team dependent on them for everything. So our aim with coaching conversations is to help that person build awareness around what the challenge is, what some of the problems are, enhance their level of self-belief in being able to deal with that situation themselves, and handing over the responsibility to them, because they're committed to these actions, because they thought about them. They're now responsible for it. You're far less likely to have to chase somebody up or follow them up of a task you told them to do, because they're invested in something that they came up with. So coaching conversations really work well in a one-to-one. The very basic premise is listen more than you talk, ask questions rather than tell, and stop yourself from giving advice. Now, I would love to show you all one-on-one coaching, but we really don't have time for that. So it is the next best thing. All right, thank you so much, Mariana. Okay, I'm going to be the employee and you're going to be the manager. So we're just reading off the screen. Are you ready?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. All right. I never get my to-do list done.
Why are you not getting your work done?
I am getting my work done. It's just that the urgent things that keep coming up, and I don't have time to do the important things on my list.
Well, that's an issue with your time management. Why don't you put aside time at the beginning of the week to plan for the next, so you can make sure you're getting your work finished?
Yeah, I suppose that's a good idea. Okay. Now let's look at the alternative. This is longer one. Are you ready, Mariana?
Yes.
Do this. Can you see that?
Yeah.
Okay. I never get my to-do list done.
Okay, what do you think this is about for you?
I think it's about my time management. I just can't get a good balance.
And what does good balance and good time management look like?
Well, I'd probably be able to get important things done on my list.
How realistic is that for you?
It's not when I have other people scheduling all those fucking urgent meetings in my calendar.
Well, in what way have you been successful with your time management in the past that you can draw from now?
Well, I really don't think it's something that I've done well before, if I'm honest. But you're really good at it. So how do you do it?
Well, thank you. If you had to pick out something that I do well, what would it be?
You're really good at kind of planning out your week on a Monday and ensuring that you've blocked out time in your calendar so other people can't book out that time. And I think if I did that, my time wouldn't be taken by other people.
Okay, so what's the first thing you'll need to do?
Okay, well, I probably need to book some time in order to do that time booking. And then I can, work on my priority list and schedule that time in my week. I could probably do that a few days ahead. And then maybe the next step is planning a week or two in advance. Okay, so now the first example, am I back on the screen, by the way? Yeah, okay. Now, the first example, whether it was a good idea or not, it wasn't the point, right? The responsibility for the action was no longer with the employee, right? The manager assumed that was the problem. Now, that may have been the problem, but that person would have gone on with that had been decided that was the problem, and it might not have solved the solution, but it's also, they're probably less committed to it because it wasn't them that came up with it. Okay, now the second approach, whilst that was quite a rigid example, it was all about empowering them through choice, support, and responsibility. Okay, it was simply asking questions. So Mariana was asking me questions that helped me to raise my own awareness as to what the problem was, and what the potential solution was. Who could I pull in to help me with this? Okay, so the responsibility was all on me. Now, even when I asked for her advice, she didn't give it. The way she framed the question was, well, what is it that I do that you think works? And it's for them to decide what they think works. Okay, so it's about this ownership, it's about self-belief, and it's about this responsibility that they're capable of taking action. And there is still that element of control as a manager, because you've still worked through that problem with them. You know the thinking behind what they're doing, so you still know how they got to that thinking and what they're going to do. Now, I wish I could show you how this can work individually, but in in lieu of that, we're going to try our hand at a coaching hot seat. Now, I will need a volunteer who's going to sit on the challenge hot seat, okay? But this is how it's going to work. So let me share my screen and I'll walk you through this very, very quickly. Group coaching hot seat. Okay, so one person sits on the hot seat and they present a challenge, okay, that they're experiencing, whether it's in their personal life, professional life, it could be anything, something about getting a job or a problem they're having with a colleague, or, a piece of work that they can't get through. There are 3 participants who are going to help that person to work through this problem, but without giving advice, helping them to kind of reflect on this challenge. So this tool I love to use in a group setting because it really, really kind of helps with developing that question asking skills, developing listening, developing those coaching skills. And it's a really great opportunity to kind of share challenges and get airtime. So one person sits on the hot seat. One person kind of facilitates the conversation, so that'll be me in this occasion. I need one person as a timekeeper, and then we're going to have 3 people supporting me as a participant. We've got about 15 minutes, so actually I'm going to say 2 people, so just 2 people who are participants. Very basically, the person on the hot seat shares their challenge in 2 minutes. In 5 minutes, the participants are going to ask questions, open questions. And this is one of the techniques that we work through when we kind of teach coaching, but using questions like how, what, why, who, when, rather than, if you did that, or have you thought about that? Because it's a yes or no, and you're again kind of projecting advice on that person. Okay, so 5 minutes where we get to kind of probe a bit more about the challenge and think about the problem, and then 5 minutes where the person on the hot seat turns their camera off, and it's almost like in real life we would be sat around a circle, and I would get that person to sit outside the circle, and the rest of us would talk amongst ourselves and make observations. Okay, we're not giving advice, we're not saying what I would do, we're making observations about the way the person talked about it, any questions that came to our minds, or certain words that they used, or whatever it is, where we're making observations about things like, I wonder how, or I wonder if. And it seems to be based on what they said. Okay, so we've got 5 minutes to make those observations, and then the person comes back into the circle and they will share some of the highlights for them, what came up as a result of listening to other people talking through that challenge. Okay, so I'm going to stop recording at this point because we're not going to record this bit.